am ArcPress Senior Editor DJ Butler. I am here today for a conversation I'm sure is going to be super interesting and a little bit, what is the subject matter of the Gopher Wood Lounge as it's evolving? We're gonna figure it out over time, but on some level, it is stuff that is interesting to the editors of ArcPress, and that turns out to be a kind of an eclectic grab bag, I think. And so this is we're talking about art today, a piece of art and an artist who are very interesting to me. So I'm here today with Kamron Coleman, and Kamron and I have never, in fact, met in person. We met had initial contact over the internet. We've had some phone conversations, and I want to kind of get to know Kamron a little bit, and then talk about a piece of art he's working on that I think you could apply adjectives to, like epic or massive. And possibly mad in scope.
For sure.
Yeah. So Kamron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited. Love talking with you, and I think we're going to have a great time today.
Yeah, me too. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be a visual artist, and sort of the media that you are working in.
Okay. Well, I'm in my early 50s, and I became a painter less than 10 years ago. I'd been a sculptor since I was a teenager, and probably my best job I ever had was cutting scrap metal in a junkyard in Lake Chelan, Washington. And I lived in the back of my pickup. And at night, I could use the shop to weld metal together. And so at night, I'd make sculptures. In the daytime, I'd cut up scrap and toss the stuff I wanted to keep off to the side and take my baths in Lake Chelan in the evening. It was just a great way to live. So I've been sculpting since I was a teenager and never had any interest in paintings. Never particularly liked, there weren't a lot of paintings that just swept my imagination like sculpture did. And until, about 10 years ago, I started painting with spray paint, but I'd empty dozens of cans of paint onto a board until it was just a swimming stew of acrylic paint with all these chemicals in it. And then at just the right time, I'd draw in that stew, and the under layers would percolate up, and you'd get this image of what I drew, but it would have all these organic growths off of it from the chemicals that came up. And so I just fell in love with that process. And I got remarried 8 years ago to a beautiful concert musician, a symphony harpist named Bethany from Salem, Oregon. She's a world-class harpist. And the executive director of the symphony saw some of the spray paintings I had done that way of her playing the harp. And she said, we could use that. We could raise some funds for the symphony with your artwork. And I said, what I really think we ought to do for the symphony is oil painting. And they're like, great. And I had never done an oil painting. So I did my first oil painting of a painting called Salem Symphony. And all of a sudden I was an oil painter. And so I had been an artist for some 30 years. When I was in my early 20s, I was a permanent gallery artist in a resort town gallery, and selling well there for scrap metal.
Sculptures, yeah.
Yeah, scrap metal sculptures. And for reasons I can get into or don't need to get into, I walked away from that gig and just stayed focused on my self-employment as a stonemason. And I sculpted in people's houses. I sculpted bas-relief sculptures on their ceilings and walls, and I built courtyards with fireplaces, and there was art everywhere in the work that I did. But But in my late 40s, I got divorced. I'd been drinking too much,
Mm.
and she'd been doing stuff that wasn't all that great either. And we got divorced for all the regular good reasons that you get divorced. And at that time, I just changed everything about my life and started painting. And I've just fallen in love with painting, and about that time is when I started this project because I needed to learn how to paint to convey what I wanted to convey, which I'd never seen in the world, and I guess it left it to me to do it. And so 8 years ago I started. I've spent about 8,000 hours so far on this project called the Apotheosis Scroll.
Oh.
It's about halfway done.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's what I'll do for the rest of my life in some form or another.
Oh. Super interesting. I want to come back and ask you questions. Your presentation has triggered some questions I want to ask you, but let me frame the Apotheosis Scroll a little bit. This is
Sure.
I think what we're going to talk about, and I hope you'll share some of it with the audience. So first of all, this is a piece of art that is massive in multiple senses of the word. And I think you've done 35 of the 72 planned panels. So you're about halfway done. So it's physically massive. And it's massive, as you've already alluded, that you're halfway done and you've been working on it 8 years. And it's very interesting to me. I'll come back to this because it feels like, as you recount it, that sort of 10 to 8 years ago, you had a number of sort of transitions, and coming out of it, part of your new direction was this piece of art, which is about transitions and about ascent and right and changing the ontological nature of a person.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to come back.
Great. Yeah.
Um, there are other ways in which this is massive. I'm going to throw out some adjectives, right? So I want to share with people today, and hopefully people will go look at apotheosisscroll.com where they can see they can see the art as it exists today. But this is. I think you have used the word to characterize it, this is a mystery. It is an initiatic piece of art. It is a piece of art that is intertextual. It connects lots of stories that are really deeply rooted in our culture, including the stories and images of classical astronomy, but also connecting with things like stories in the Bible or other kinds of stories and images that are deep in our culture and our unconscious minds, and so it's a piece of art that is designed to be. I mean, this is what I think. I think it's designed to be transformative. That at the end there's a 500-foot long walkway, or maybe it's digital, but you have 500 feet of scroll to slowly move through, and we'll see these in a few minutes. But the panels are these are not Ellsworth Kelly paintings. It's not a brick of red or something, right? Like there is a lot of detail on these panels. There are words, images, schematics, and so there's a time commitment to experience the whole thing linearly, and I think the goal is to help transform, help mature a person, help a person in some sense achieve a kind of personal ascent. And and so I find it astonishing. Now that's sort of my characterization, right? Like this is, and I don't feel like you need to give a characterization because what I want you to do is show the art in a few minutes here. But if you have any comment on what I've said, right? Like no, Dave, you're wrong, or something important to add. I'd be interested. Like how do you see it yourself? This thing that has taken 8 years.
That was a great introduction to it. It's super complex. It's not. This isn't a simple project, but the scroll in scroll form. The 300 feet that are done so far, I did reveal to the public last fall at a religious conference in Utah. And none of them there were expecting to see it. But I had spent the last several months prior to that show building 42 tables, incline drafting tables.
Mm-hmm.
They were each 8 feet long. And so I had 300 foot of drafting tables set up with 300 feet of scroll in 3 100-foot rolls rolled out onto those attached drafting tables. I would say that the average time people spent, anyone who did engage with it, I think the minimum time was about 40 minutes just to walk through it. And some people spent over 6 hours just starting to absorb it. And like you said, that's half done. But I didn't know if I would ever see that in my life, if I would ever even see it on canvas rolls rolled out. So the scroll is made of hundreds of paintings. It has a book-length handwritten essay where I've written every word out and digitally edited every word for clarity on the computer. And it's got hundreds of diagrams. As you said, it's astronomical. This is an astronomical mystery, which is what the Bible is. The Bible is an astronomical mystery. But, I mean, the ancients, their whole chalkboard, where they described everything on, it was the sky. And that applies to the Bible as well. You can lay on your back and see the whole Gospel of John played out in the sky above you. And I'm trying to show that, not in a proselytizing way, but in a syncretized way, that it's kind of a universal monomyth. Christianity is part of that monomyth. And that's my main character is Jesus as the initiatic ascender, right? And so the Gospels take you through that process of ascent, and it's all a star story. And it's completely compatible with all the other star stories, which are really more technically the mysteries. So the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, the Babylonian mysteries, the Egyptian mysteries. I characterize the Jesus story as a mystery of a kind with those mysteries.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to demonstrate that. But I never thought that I would see the scroll rolled out. Because while I make all of these things, I write them out, I draw the diagrams, I paint the paintings, then I convert all of those things to digital files, and then I build the panels in Photoshop as a very intricate digital artwork, and that's a panel. And there are 36 panels so far, and each panel is 32 by 96. Yeah, 32 by 96. And so anyone who wants to can go to apotheosisscroll.com and see the images, and you can zoom in on them. And these things go deep. I mean, there's a lot of art in these, as you said. And then I've started making video commentaries, a panel at a time. And the commentaries are not light. Like there's a lot going on in them, and like there's too much for me to take in, and I built them. And so sometimes I would listen to it, just listen. Don't look at the images, and then sometimes just kind of let the images play to your imagination. And I think a person, if they really wanted to understand what was going on, they'd listen to or watch the commentary a couple of times.
Yeah.
It's all animated, and it's hopefully somewhat entertaining.
Yeah.
But it's not a tweet, you know. It's
long form art.
Yeah, but it's fun. There's humor in there. There's dirty jokes. Because all the mysteries had that, like,
sure,
stuff that you won't get.
Yeah, 100%. So you haven't finished recording the commentaries for all the 35 existing panels, have you?
Not at all. It's going to take me years to make the commentaries. I have 4 commentaries done. The 5th I finished today, and I'll be uploading that to YouTube when I get a chance. And so it's going to take me, I figure, at least 3 years just to make the commentaries for the panels, because as my wife said, I'm building another scroll. In video form, it's a completely other. There's so much more that you can do with video than you can do with a static piece of art. I had no idea. So I had to teach myself how to make videos at all in the last few months. And so be patient with me in that respect. I'm just learning how to do this, but if we're talking about astronomy, there's no better way to describe what's going on astronomically than to have these images merging, and spreading apart, and coming into focus and out of focus, and overlapping, because it's all about layers. And with video, you can show all that. When I give lectures at the chalkboard, I mean, the chalkboard's an utter mess after an hour lecture. There's squiggly lines and circles and all over the chalkboard, because you're trying to show movement and how things relate, how these images relate. And with video, you just show it, you know? And so video is phenomenal for me. I had no idea. And so I'm giving it as much seriousness as an art form as I am the scroll itself. And I just consider it a completely other form of art on the same subject. It's riffing on the same subject, but I'm not just sitting there explaining it. It itself is art form, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that's got to be immensely helpful. I mean, like I say, this is an intertextual piece. It's correlating ideas about the classical mysteries. By the way, you early on in our conversations, you sent me I think it might have been a 60 or an 80-page kind of essay, which included a bibliography. And I said, man, I'm going to have to read some books. So I went and read 3 or 4 books on Mithraism.
Right.
And also some James Tabor stuff. And I can't remember what else, to sort of say, okay, there's pieces here that I want to understand and get my head around. One of the the night sky is such an ancient piece of our intellectual furniture, and it's interesting to me that in the industrialized West, I think there have been several generations where people basically don't have any idea what the night sky is, and so I think the ability to do video and sort of show movement, right? And show, look, here's the field of the stars. This is Orion, right? This is whatever. Has got to be super valuable in terms of presenting this art.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
I can't see my night sky at all.
Are you?
I can hardly see it at all.
You're in the Pacific Northwest, right? So are you near one of the big cities then?
I'm in Salem, Oregon.
Oh yeah.
and and it's not too bad, but you can't see you just can't see much.
Yeah.
I lived in Samoa for a year and a half, and that's the southern hemisphere, southern sky.
Yep.
And you can see these constellations march across the sky.
Yeah.
On an island. You can see it. You can see the story there, and you can see all the stars. And then my first home was an abandoned Catholic church in the Waterville Plateau of Eastern Washington, a town of 30 people. And I bought with my wife an abandoned Catholic church that had no power or sewer or water to it. And we spent 8 years making that into a home. We could see stars up there. And and the Aurora Borealis, it was gorgeous. But where I live now, I can't see the stars. And before I started this project, I could have probably told you the Big Dipper, the Pole Star, Polaris, Orion. I don't know if I could have identified anything else in the sky.
Yeah.
Except for when I was in Samoa, when you could really see these constellations. The Southern Cross was, phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I understand that no one knows what the constellations are.
Yeah.
So I will help you, and I'll show you what they are and why it matters. And it matters so much to understand. People say that, why do we have to study the Bible in literature or in philosophy? Because, that's where the stories are. Those are the archetypal stories on which civilization is built. They're not the only ones. But you have to have that. If you can't speak the language of Scripture, you can't speak the language of philosophy or anything else. And I guess I would say now, knowing what I know, you can't speak the language of Scripture if you can't speak the language of astronomy, because that's the language they're written in.
Yeah.
And they come alive. The story of David and Goliath is a star story. You can see this played out, right? That's why it's successful. One of the reasons Christianity took off like it did was because it was a star story. Everybody already knew the characters, but it was a great new mythology for what was happening at the time politically and astronomically. And this character of Jesus just fit into the moment. And that's what made Christianity so transmissible. It wasn't because people could read the Gospels, not in the first century. They didn't even exist. And so what transmitted it was the antiquity of the language, reformed for the moment, that the phenomenally significant moment that was happening in Palestine. And so if you are willing to learn that language, it doesn't matter what religion you are. It will expand your understanding of what Christianity was about in the first century, more than reading any of the apologists or letters of Paul. Or if you want to know what Christianity is about, it's a star story, and it's really compelling. You don't have to agree with your neighbor, your friend, your brother or sister about what it's saying, because it's subjective enough, being a star story, to allow you to merge into that however you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't supply the dogma. It supplies as the archetype. Right?
Yeah. The story.
One thing that's been really interesting to me, I had told a coworker once about the project. And I said, yeah, Christianity was a star story. And he said, I knew it. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, oh, that it wasn't true. I'm like, oh, wait a second. That's not what that means at all. It's an archetypal story that was filled out by a historical person, right? And what that means, you're going to have to figure out, over the course of your life. But it doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah.
It means it's it's of a kind with all of the great ancient myths.
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. Lots of reactions here in my head. Two things. One, a quick story. My dad always knows now the night sky very well. And I always thought at some point I would have to learn it. And in 2010, I set out to do it and had my kids were all born then, they ranged from 7 to 2. And, I started seriously learning it and taking them out and showing them anytime we could. And when we lived in Idaho, we would drive down to the Bruno sand dunes to get kind of the nearest dark sky. Here in Utah, the real dark skies in the Nevada border in the there's a national park, I forget the name of it. But you drive about an hour and a half out to like Delta, Utah, and they're small towns, but they're really small towns, and they small enough that the light doesn't interfere. And so several times a year started taking my kids out. There is a downside though, because my oldest daughter went to the planetarium with her class. I think she might have been in 6th grade or something. And the planetarium, they got up, there's the dome, and the planetarium guide said, "Okay, do any of you want to point out some stars?" And none of the kids could say anything. And my daughter Callie took the laser pointer and didn't stop until she pointed out everything. Right. And then the show was basically over because there was nothing for the planetarium kid left to say. Right. Because my daughter was like, well, there's the Big Dipper and you Arcturus, and that's in the constellation Boötes. And those are the Canes Venatici defending Boötes, the shepherd, against the bear. And if you continue till you spy Spica, you're right. Like the whole thing. And I'm proud of her. It may have ruined her planetarium experience. But the other thing I was going to say is there's something profoundly ancient about this piece of art you're doing. Before human beings could write, we were out there on the savannas and the plains and observing over centuries the movement of the night sky and recording this stuff verbally in stories to pass on this knowledge, right? So, and then
Yes.
once we could write, it starts getting captured in the oldest writing, right? Gilgamesh and the Greeks and whatever Indian myth.
Mm-hmm.
So there, in a sense, what you're doing is you're you're picking up that tradition. You're going back to that connection between the stars and our most basic stories and the sort of psychological drives and the spiritual impulses that led us to eventually build temples and build this stuff into buildings, right? But now you're doing it in graphic art, which I love. This is why I'm crazy about this project. I'm interested how you got to how did it occur to you? Like, what's the story? What's the process whereby you said, I am going to make a piece of art that is.
Yeah.
Did you think it was going to be 15 years when you started?
Oh, no.
And had you read all these books then? This is where your head was? That you were just 10 years ago, you were thinking about Mithraism. You had some new changes, new directions in your life. Like, how did you undertake this quest? I think it's a fair word. How did you get on this sort of path to produce this?
Well, if I would have known, of course, I would have never done it. I had no idea. It was not at all like that. It was not intentional, but it was fairly soon that it started to occur to me that that's what it was going to have to be if I was going to do it at all. But when you're talking about your daughter and those, I don't know any of that. Like, she would teach me what she knows. People in the Indus Valley would teach me what they know. And I have a vision of this system that's a new mystery. Okay, I'm not trying to say this is what the Jews did, or this is what the Greeks did, or this is what they, do in South America. This is my imagination. I'm creating a mystery. I think, as you said best, because a change was thrust upon me, an initiatic experience was thrust on me, and this is the vision that resulted from this initiatic experience, I think I would say. And so, like, there's this Western astronomy that your daughter's describing, and I would love to hear that. I don't know what that is. And there's this astronomy here and here. And I have found a vein of gold running through history, and I'm illuminating that vein. But I bet you there's 1,000 other veins crisscrossing through time and astronomy. And I can tell you mine is pure imaginative fiction. No one in history has ever created this particular mystery out of this vein, right? It's a syncretization of what I have learned from what I have read, right? Which is going to be a completely different syncretization that you would have from what you have read, right? And that's what's so wonderful about it, is because it's all archetypal. And there's this truth that just keeps showing up, no matter which line you trace, about what a human is and what a human was made to be. And I think that's what all of them are saying. So if I would have known that it was going to be this big a deal, my wife only understood last year what I was trying to do. And when I was invited to that conference, the way that the director explained why they wanted me there, my wife was like, now I get this. Oh. I understand this now. Because after 7 years of being a monk, working a lot of hours on this, and I have a day job, and for the first time in 7 years, I got to come out of my cave and unroll my scroll, and it gave me enough to keep going. So right now I have no followers. I didn't have enough supporting material there for people to walk away with. They were overwhelmed with this thing and disappeared into the atmosphere. I didn't have anything for them to learn about what they had just seen.
A book or a calendar or something.
Nothing. And so, except a website, you can go look at these images, right? But it's not that easy to understand what you're seeing, and so that's why I have to tell you about it in the videos. But I don't have any followers, except I think I have two. A 15-year-old girl named Zara Hemla, and I'm grateful for her. She found an error in one of the drawings that's like on the 20th panel in this little. And she texted me. She texted my kids this little error. Show your dad that he spelled this word wrong. And I couldn't believe that somebody on this planet was looking this closely at this thing. And so that was marvelous. And then my other person that gives me encouragement is a angry redhead empty nester who wants more representation of the divine feminine in her organized religion. And she's one of my best friends. But other than those two, I don't know if very many people know what I'm doing. And so I made this public so that I could get the support and encouragement that I need.
Yeah.
Because 7 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be at it for 7 to 10 more years or so. And I hope people will come along with me now and start talking about this and engaging with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very very cool. You used the word monomyth. I think that word was maybe coined by Joseph Campbell, and I think again that's probably you're consciously using the word, which is great because I wanted to make this connection as another way to think about what you're doing, right? So Joseph Campbell's most famous book is The Hero with a Thousand Faces, right? Which talks about this idea that there is only one story, right? And people quibble, maybe that's not right, but it's a very influential idea that all stories are basically variations on the same basic narrative about a hero who has to enter the world of danger and overcome a road of trials before he can die and be resurrected, and he can get special insight, and then he returns bringing blessings to everybody who didn't go on the adventure but on whose behalf he went. Right. Campbell also wrote The Masks of God. Campbell was huge when I started in college, my freshman year. He was enormous. Half my classes we were talking about Joseph Campbell, and then that was the tail end of the Campbell moment. I mean, the books are still out there, but he was, man, he was all over PBS being interviewed by Bill Moyers and talking about Star Wars and stuff. So I read a lot of his things, including his 4-volume Masks of God. Book 1 is primitive mythology. I think it's Occidental mythology, Oriental mythology, and then book 4 is creative mythology. And the explicit argument he makes is the making and the utilization of myths is an intrinsically human activity, and it's not done. It's not over. We may not recognize it, but in art, we still have mythologists at work, right? Mythopoets are still creating myths. They're still informing and describing our lives, whether we know it or not. So if we are consciously aware of it, maybe that's actually a good idea. Maybe that's better. And I think again, sort of, this is sort of a lens through which I see you is consciously a mythologist. Again, like you were saying, that does not mean I think you're telling untrue stories. I think it means you are engaging in telling a very important story about the human spirit, and telling it in a very old language, but with but through your own experience with your own idiosyncrasies and imagery. So Kamron, I would love it if you would show us a few of these panels. There are 35 now. If you've got some set of whatever the right number is to sort of walk us through, again, people can see, I think, all 35 current panels and also links to sounds like 4 current video explanations at apotheosisscroll.com. But here's a little sample to kind of see what we're talking about.
Yeah, so here's one. Can you see it there?
Yes.
With Prometheus. After I get done sharing this, I'll show you the original artwork that's hanging on the wall behind me.
Oh, fun. So I know enough Hebrew to know that over on the left that says Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or Vayehi Or. So that's from Genesis 1. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's that Hebrew text there. And you don't need to confirm my interpretations because that's not a fair question. But just what I'm seeing here, and that looks to me like something maybe like a Prometheus story connecting the idea of the creation of light with the Greek telling of man getting fire, right? One of the gods rebelling against the rest of the gods and bringing fire, light. down to man. I think over on the right is the Mithraic tauroctony, maybe. So there's is some of the imagery there. So there's it's interesting. The figure, so the tauroctony is the ritual slaying of the bull, which um, may also be a representation of part of the zodiac, but it's sort of the characteristic sacrifice of Mithraism, right? And there's a figure beneath the rock. Is it Christ? Is it Prometheus? Are those different? Right? It looks, because Prometheus is punished for his theft by being chained to a rock, and an eagle pecks out his liver perpetually. And that's a very crucified looking Prometheus with an eagle. And that's just, frankly, my eyesight's not good enough to see more detail. That's without reading any of the text or looking at the. Now, I think I'm seeing like a human figure, a spinal column, spermatozoan, right? There we go. Yep, zooming in. Oh, well, maybe it is the spermatozoa, but it's a serpent swallowing something, a seed, maybe. I mean, it's interesting. That basically, the Serpent Mound in Peebles, Ohio, basically looks like that. And so we got some constellations, obviously Sagittarius, Scorpio, Libra,
Virgo.
Yeah, Virgo.
Virgo is next year.
Yeah. And on the other side, I'm seeing, Taurus and Aries. So it's interesting. You have the zodiac, but you don't have them in one circle. You have them in two half circles. You got a lion-headed man with a serpent on his shoulder, or wrapped around him. He's wrapped around him, which is interesting because that's an astronomical image too. The 13th constellation that's on the ecliptic but is not counted in the zodiac is a giant who's wearing a serpent wrapped around him. That's Ophiuchus. And you've got, so look at that. So across his abdomen, you've got what looks like the pyramids of Giza. So that suggests that maybe that's Orion. That's a representation of Orion. Or that's too strong a language. That maybe associates that image to Orion in some sense, because I think the three pyramids of Giza have an alignment to the three stars of Orion's belt.
So that's the tauroctony you were talking about.
Yeah. Now Caucasus, I should know
white
that.
Bull.
Is Caucasus? Is that burning? Is that what the word means? Is it the burning?
It's white mountain, white as snow, and the bull is the white bull, right? Of Mithraism. Yeah. Well, I'm riffing on Jesus's commentary that on this rock I will build my church.
Oh, yeah.
And so Taurus is also representative of the earth. If you look east, there's a column of stars, the Milky Way, we call it, this fountain of frothing stars. Everything to the left of it was heaven in the sky, and everything to the right of it was the earth in the sky. It wasn't that earth was what we stood on, but the way that you would tell the story is that Leo, Cancer, Gemini is standing in that river, in that tree of life. That's the celestial side. That's the heavenly side. And that tree of life, the Milky Way, is the veil. So when you pass through the veil, you go to the celestial kingdom, which is ruled by Leo. And that's where those constellations are. Well, on the right side of the veil, or the Milky Way, or the tree of life, is the earth, because you've got the good shepherd Orion standing there with the bull and then the sheep, right, of Aries. So that's Earth, that's the land. And then you go a little further south and you get to Pisces. So now you're in the river or the lake or the water, right? And so when the scriptures talk about heaven or when they talk about the earth, you look to the sky to see how this story is played out. And so Taurus is just like Leo is the grand symbol for everything celestial, Taurus is the grand symbol for everything terrestrial. And so the rock upon which Christ's church was built, I'm saying is the earth, or is represented in Taurus, or the tauroctony scene. And as you perfectly identified, Prometheus is looking very Christ-like there, and the eagle is very Roman, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm saying that, and then so the rock in Mithraism is the Caucasus Mountains, and so that's why I'm saying the original Christian mystery was built on that rock, or the tauroctony. You did great. You did great.
In the depiction of the tauroctony, there is usually a human figure. He is above the bull, and I forget exactly how it goes. I think he's pulling the bull's head back, right, to slit the bull's throat. He's on top of the bull, and I can't remember. There's something about the placement of his legs, like, but fundamentally he's the sacrificer. So there's a kind of an irony here too against the kind of classical Mithraic scene, where the human figure is sacrificed in a Promethic or a Christ. It's not Christian. It's a Christological way. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Let's see.
Okay, so before I go to the other one, this painting behind me there, can you see that? That's the original.
Oh, yeah. Okay, this is good. So this gets into questions. So the panels exist. Are they basically assembled digital images, but some of the components are other underlying media, like that's an oil painting?
Right. This is a giant oil painting. And so it's digitalized and put into that digital document, which is that panel.
Yeah. Do most of the panels have oil paintings in them?
Yes. Most of the panels have one or two oil paintings.
So this is where the 7 years went.
Right. Right. Yeah. Hundreds of original artworks for this project.
Yeah. Wow.
So let's talk for a minute about Mithraism, because you've latched onto that, which is good, which is really good. So there's a debate that is as old as Christian history, which is, the origin. Where did this thing come from?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I can explain this very briefly and very controversially.
Okay.
The way I see it, and I don't care if anybody sees it the way I do or not. I'm just telling you how I see it. But I see that Christianity grew organically from three boughs of one tree. And they're represented by Peter, James, and John. James is Judaic Christianity. I think it's fairly evident from history that Christianity, the followers of Jesus, were Jews.
Sure.
Okay, and that Jewish movement of Christianity is represented by James, who was his successor. Okay, and then there's Peter. Mm-hmm. And Peter, as everybody knows, represents the ecclesiastical church that grew out from this trunk, right? It's not the same. The New Testament, they're arguing amongst themselves the whole time about which is more legitimate, the Jewish strain, the Jewish bough, or the Greek bough, right?
Faith versus works, table fellowship. Do we have to keep kosher? Do we have to circumcise, right? And Peter's sort of so the James here is actually James, the brother of Jesus, the putative author of the Epistle of James, who in Acts seems to actually, and in Galatians seems to actually be in charge of the Church of Jerusalem at the time when that was where the headquarters of the church was, and everybody, all of the membership were all Jews. It was a Jewish movement till Rome is destroyed in 70 AD. So it's James, the brother of Jesus, and Peter sort of is made to sort of, he looks like he sort of gives some legitimacy to Paul's understanding, which is at odds with James, because really it's Paul and James that are arguing in the New Testament, right? And Peter kind of is. The stories are made. The stories sound like Peter basically approves Paul's point of view, right? Historically, that point of view wins because Rome is destroyed. The Jewish Christian groups survive maybe until the early 300s, and that's basically it. They're absorbed elsewhere, or they disappear, right? Whether they were, regardless of who was right and wrong, right? That's historically how it plays out.
Yeah, if you went on for 3 hours, I would agree with everything you said. That fundamental understanding is my fundamental understanding.
No.
So we've covered the two, right? James and Peter, and now there's John. John represents the mysteries, and early on, so the mystery is not Judeo-Christianity. The mystery is of a kind with the other mysteries. And the mystery or the mysteries of godliness was a thing. It's not this nebulous, like mysterious thing. We're talking about the Roman mystery that was like the Greek mystery, was like the Egyptian mystery of Isis, was like all the other mysteries. The Romans created a mystery and disseminated it through their military. And that mystery was called Mithraism. And my work supposes that Jesus was the hero, initiatic, ascending archetype of Mithraism. Why? Why would they do that? Because the biggest problem facing Rome, they had a big looming problem, which was Persia, which that's just world war. Okay, that was just the two big guys staring each other down for decades. But the biggest problem at hand was Palestine. And the revolt, the generations-long revolt in Palestine had to be crushed for Rome to have peace, the Pax Romana. And they didn't do that by demonizing and vilifying the Jews. They did it by assimilating what Jews they could, by making their hero figure the mystery's hero figure. It's paradoxical, right? It's an ironic choice. But the thing about a mystery, it's astronomical. And so the end of every age, the god is killed and is reborn, resurrected as the god of the next age. And so the god of the age of Taurus was killed and then reborn as the son of God in Aries. Well, the god of Aries had to be killed, and that god was reborn as the son of God of Pisces. And so you had because they were leaving the age of Aries, they had to kill a ram. They had to kill a lamb. And the Jews overall represented Aries for reasons we won't go into now. But all of their symbolism, all of their temple symbolism was sheep-based, right? And was completely appropriate to the time. And so one of those sheep had to be killed, and in order for the next age to be born. And that's what I believe was being conveyed in Mithraism. And Mithraism is all over the New Testament. It's all over it. If you understand what's going on in Mithraism, then in my view, I'm reading a story that is as much Mithraic as anything else. It's not only Mithraic, right? But it's as Mithraic as it is Jewish. I think that's fair to say.
So this is super interesting because the Mithraism didn't leave any writings. It left.
That's right.
We have found it left temples. The Mithraeum was a temple, and we have found a number of them, and they vary in size. Sometimes they're really tiny. I think a few are a little larger that we have. Man, I'm not an expert in this, but I think they're underground, and we have, like with the mysteries of Eleusis or Isis, we have literary references, so we kind of think we know some of what happened. There was some meals. We know they had ranks. So I'm what you said is very provocative. So here's what I think. I think if you looked up in like an encyclopedia, it would say something like this, right? Rome in the early centuries of the Christian era had kind of two big. I think they'd say they're both mystery religions. One was Mithraism and one was Christianity. And Mithraism tended to recruit and appeal to elites. So it was only men for starters, but often it was sort of military people. And like I said, they had tiered ranks, and I forget what they were, but like Korvax is one, the crow, and anyway, I think they had 7 different ranks. And part of your ascension in Mithraism was your ability to pay for the banquet. So like it attracted wealthy people too, right? So it was a religion of rich men, rich, powerful men. And whereas Christianity welcomed, undesirables like women and, slaves and poor people. And so I think the story you would read in an encyclopedia says something like, well, there were these two, and it was maybe not obvious in the year, say, 150 or whatever, which of them would eventually emerge. But it turned out that, if you bet on the society's elites, you lost. Like that disappears. Christianity continues. But it sounds like you're suggesting, and maybe this is an artistic, maybe this is partly a reading of history. Maybe it's also partly an artistic suggestion, right? An interpretive suggestion that that there's a relationship between those two, right? That those are the same, or they have a common origin, or they have a common language or purpose of some kind.
That's good. But what's being disseminated in Mithraism isn't Christianity.
Yeah. Okay.
What's being disseminated is its hero. Okay, it's archetypal Lamb of God who gets reborn as the god of the age of Pisces, right? But I've read, and I think there's good evidence for the hypothesis that the first Mithraic temple was in Caesarea Maritima, which is where the Flavian dynasty was headquartered to put down the Jewish revolt. That's where they were before Vespasian became emperor, and it was their home base. there's evidence that the very first Mithraeum was in Caesarea Maritima, was converted from a shipping warehouse on the coast there, and the reason it was selected was because it was dome shaped. Okay, well, the temple in Mithraism is the temple.
Oh, interesting.
And what you saw, so the cross section of the skull, and so the Mithraic tauroctony scene, which is used described as Mithras straddling the Taurus and thrusting a sword into his shoulder. Okay, so it's not a sacrifice scene.
Okay.
Because a sacrifice is you slit the throat, whether it's a dove or a sheep or a bull. You slit the throat, the blood runs out. That's an important part of the initiation of the sacrifice. Well, the bull is not being sacrificed that way. It's a riddle. And what Mithras is doing is he's representing the entire cosmos as Orion expanded into the cosmos. Okay, so not Orion here is the good shepherd on this side of the veil, but Orion ascended until the universe is subsumed in him. And he's straddling the Taurus, which is actually the posture of Taurus, which is the same in every temple. Every temple they had to produce exactly the same scene.
Yep.
With total precision. The pose of the cow, Taurus, is Leo. So it's showing mind and body in an eclipse, where Leo, the mind, the sun, and the bull, which is female, have merged into an eclipse where it's neither male nor female. And the heart and mind are acting harmoniously and together. And then the phenomenal representation, because of all the different clues in the tauroctony scene, are an image of the cosmos. The sword being thrust into the shoulder of the cow is locating the celestial pull of the whole cosmos in relation to all of the other constellations represented. So it's saying that Mithras is fixing the center point around which everything revolves. Now, when you go into the Mithraeum, into the temple that's shaped like the skull, you see that scene in front of you. And that cosmic scene is the same diagram as the cross-section of the human brain. And the tail of the cow of Taurus is the optic nerve. And the testicles of the bull are the pituitary gland. And the place where he's thrusting the sword in is the pineal gland. And Mithras himself is the thalamus, the mediator. And so the temple in Mithraism was this temple, which is a fractal of the whole cosmos. And so what you're doing when you were initiated in Mithraism was you were learning that you, Dave, are a fractal of the cosmos. And if you could come to that understanding, that was the purpose of the temple, because it's not obvious when you look at the sky that you are a fractal of that.
No.
And so the temple is the medium by which people learned that what they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
when you say you were a fractal, like this, let me make sure. Let me state what I think you're saying, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. The characteristic of a fractal is that it repeats its pattern at all scales. You zoom in and it's the same pattern. So this is sort of an as above, so below kind of idea, which is a very old. It's associated with Hermetism, but it's really old, right? the idea that, hey, the patterns that are up there are also here, right? Within me. So I think that's okay, super interesting.
That's what a temple did. That's what a temple is. And so the word constellation in Hebrew, as you know, is Maserat, right? You would know how to pronounce it better than me. But
Yeah, good job.
okay. And so the the word um, the word for constellation and ordinances, it's all the same thing. And so if you talk about ordinances in a temple, you're talking about, so what you do in a temple is people wore costumes representing different elements of the cosmos. You'd have a person in a costume, in a lion costume, representing the Father, and you'd have a person in a cow costume, in a bull costume, representing Taurus. You'd have a person in a raven costume, representing the type of being that can straddle the living and the dead and peer behind the veil. And these characters are performing the ordinances. Okay? They're performing the constellations. And so when you went to a temple, you went there to perform ordinances so that you understood by acting it out where you fit in that scheme. Right? And it looks to me like Jesus was adopted by Mithraism to be the initiatic ascender who was killed in order to close out the age of Aries and was resurrected as the Son of God to bring about the age of Pisces. And I think that in the first century, there was no clear, hard lines between any of this. People could be both Mithraic and Christian, right? But you couldn't be Mithraic and Jewish because you couldn't have the iconography, right? So it's interesting because that first Mithraeum in Caesarea Maritima had no iconography except a coin of Mithras, because the Jews could use coinage.
Which this is distinctive, right? Because, like I said, we don't have texts from Mithraism. What we have are the Mithraea, the Mithraeums, and they characteristically, we do have murals in these, right? That portray the Taraki and related scenes.
But none in the one in Caesarea Maritima, because it was used by Jews.
Because they're aniconic. Super interesting.
And so I don't think that as Mithraism transmitted through the world, that it kept its emphasis on Jesus. Okay? When Mithraism was practiced in Germany, which was what, the Gauls then, it wasn't a Jesus thing.
No.
Because that wasn't their language. That wasn't their issue there. When it was practiced in England, Mithraism wasn't Jesus focused. Okay? It was only focused on that where it started, which is in Palestine. And then as it disseminates around the world, it takes on the characteristics of the people of where you are. So that means that Mithraism everywhere wasn't the same. It took on it was that fake fish that you can flavor like crab. It was flavorable to any flavor where you were. But since it began in Palestine, it started as the mysteries of godliness that I think then, in the 4th century, like everything else, Mithraism, along with all of the other mysteries, were brutally shut down and crushed. Oh. And that was because Mithras, the guy straddling the bull, is Persian. The second coming of Christ is Persian. And they were going to war against Persia. And so they're like, okay, hero of Mithraism will no longer do. So, because we're going to war with these very people. So it was shut down along with everything else. But the church fathers criticized Mithraism as a satanic imitation of the Christian sacrament. Yeah. And this is several hundred years after it had been running. And so it's up to the researcher, to the individual, to try to figure out whether the church fathers were right in that assessment or if they had inverted it. And it was actually part of the original Christian testimony.
Yeah. I mean, it suggests that that Mithraism, as they understood it, was uncomfortably close to what they thought of as Orthodox worship, right?
It was really close. And if you go back further, which we don't have record of, as you say, I don't think it was distinguishable from it.
Yeah.
So my probably most controversial thing I could possibly say to any audience is that I think the book of Revelation, which I think it took time to create. I've heard as many as 500 years. But the John's Revelation is his record of his initiation in Mithraism.
Oh, interesting.
And over time, within the text, what's that called? Intertextually.
Yeah.
It demonizes its own story. It corrects its own story as it goes. And so it has this part about a Mithraic initiation. And then it says, all that stuff you just read is bad. And then it goes on with the Mithraic initiation. And then a new voice, from 100 years later says, all that there that you just read is bad. Don't do that. And then it has more of the initiation. And so it's having an internal schizophrenic argument where it's contradicting itself as it goes along. But in my view, the original oldest part of the book of Revelation is a Mithraic initiation. And so when we say we don't have any written record of Mithraism, I think we do it. And it's been very ubiquitous in Western civilization, which is the book of Revelation. Not to mention that I think it also shows up in the Sermon on the Mount and is all over the New Testament.
I mean, that's super interesting because, again, the sort of ordinary understanding is that we have these two rival religions, and of one we have no words but this archaeology, and of the other we have words but very little archaeology that we're confident of for basically the same period. And a question you're asking is, well, maybe actually we're splitting apart two things that were originally the same.
Well, they were originally, part of the same movement, but like any movement, there's 100 different branches to that movement. And I don't think that they distinguish themselves as carefully as we might today. Yeah. And because you could be a Jew who was initiated in the Mithraic mystery as long as there wasn't iconography that you had to worship. Right? And everything in between. So to be Jewish was not a monolithic thing at all. It had a 1,000 ways, as well as all of the other religious traditions. It wasn't all a monolith where you stuck your name to one of these. People lived with multiple identities at the same time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, obviously at this rate, if we were to look at all 35 panels, we would spend 60 hours. So that's not going to happen. But if there was another panel or two you could show us, and I will refrain from commenting very much, I would love people to sort of get a little more sample of the. It's a work of art we're fundamentally talking about. I'd love to show a couple panels if we could.
Well, Mithraism isn't the old is one uniting concept of the scroll,
Yeah.
but it's not what it's about. So the first half of the scroll deals with, so it has 7 seals of initiation. And the first 4 seals of initiation happen on the earth side of the veil.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last 3 seals of the initiation happen on the celestial side of the veil.
Which,
And
just to reconnect, when you say the veil, one of the things the correspondences you've suggested to us is that that's the Milky Way. And so that was such a series of 7 signs that are bisected by the Milky Way.
Precisely. Thank you. Yeah. And so these astronomical ordinances or constellations ascend the body as well. Just like the chakras of the spine, there are seals that go, or ordinances that ascend the front of the body. And whether you're ascending the spine or the front of the body, the top 3 seals are shared both front and back. And they are the throat, ears, and mouth is the 5th seal. The 6th seal is the single eye, or the eyes, or vision. And the 7th seal is the crown, or the top of the head.
Fantastic.
Do you want another one, or do you want to talk about something else?
Let's see another one.
Let's try to do something totally different, so that people don't get Mithraism burnout here. How about, so this is my favorite one.
Here we go.
So for me, this is what the scroll is all about. This is depicting the eclipse. So in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, which was the left side of the veil, or the Milky Way. They were cast out of the presence of God, who is Leo, the celestial kingdom. And they passed through the veil into the world, where Orion and Taurus and Aries are there in the pastures. And so the Father, who is spirit, is represented by what's on the left-hand side of the veil. And the Mother is represented by matter, mother, mater in Greek, matter. And so this painting is showing the Father and the Mother reuniting. And now he's dirty and she's covered in light, and they're one, which is depicted by the eclipse there of the moon in front of the sun. And that's also that's what's also being represented in the tauroctony scene. I teach this in the videos, in the video commentaries, and it'd be too complicated to get into now. But the whole point of the scroll is to show that the unity of spirit and matter is what creates the human soul. The human soul is not merely dirt with a spiritual essence that it's striving toward, but the soul is made of if it's balanced, if it's harmonious, it's equally spirit and matter. And when it is combined thus, that's represented by the eclipse. And if you've ever been in an eclipse, the moment of that totality, the whole world just stops and all the birds quit chirping and everything gets completely still and peaceful, and you're filled with a sense of euphoric joy. And so for the very few people who ever get to experience a total solar eclipse, it is a spiritual experience that the ancients, that's when that separation that happened in the Garden of Eden, that's when matter and spirit are finally reunited, or mother and father are finally reunited. So my work is very heavy on whatever evidence there is for a divine feminine. My work is full of that. That's a primary objective of the scroll, is to teach divine feminine theology.
Interesting. That's fascinating. And you've got the ecliptic there, Leo on the far left, Orion a little bit off. See, Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, etc. And the moon traveling along the ecliptic. Yep. I love the moon.
So this is
really cool.
Oh, yeah, that's fun, right? So this image right here is depicting the total solar eclipse that happened in 2024, and how an ancient person might have seen that event.
Interesting. Were you somewhere where you could see it?
I have a horrible story to tell you about that.
Oh no.
So it passed right over Salem.
Yeah.
And I knew it was coming and all that. I had never been in a total solar eclipse, and I work 45 minutes north toward Portland. And I went to work that day thinking that it would be just as good if I saw it from Tualatin. And it's not. I missed one of the. I wasn't even into all of this stuff at that time. This is the one that happened in 2017. Then, right?
Yep.
The one that passed from west to east across the United States.
Yeah.
And it passed right over the top of Salem, Oregon. And I saw like a 99% eclipse.
Yep.
And my wife, who was at home in Salem, saw the total solar eclipse. And the two experiences are not the same.
Yep.
And so she was outside, and we live in a townhouse, and there's a bunch of people. So there's a bunch of people outside of their homes. And when the total eclipse happened, even where I was, there was no more birds chirping, no more sounds at all. It was almost completely dark where I was 45 minutes north. But in Salem, it went so dark you couldn't see the hand in front of your face. And everybody spontaneously started singing.
Wow.
And my wife is a very logical, mind-driven person.
Yeah.
And she's not a spiritual person. And that was a spiritual crown of her entire life, was to experience that event. And the only word that can possibly convey a total solar eclipse is peace. And so when things are in harmony, when you're no longer male or female, when you're no longer left or right, and when you're no longer inside or outside, the eclipse is a way of demonstrating that you're everything at one time. You're explaining that enlightenment that philosophers have tried to explain for thousands of years is best explained by what happens in an eclipse. And that's what is being conveyed in the Tauroctony scene as well.
That's very cool. I saw that eclipse. I went to Rexburg, Idaho, drove up to Rexburg, Idaho, and there was a school principal who was very entrepreneurially raising money for his school, his elementary school, for $20 you could park in his school parking lot, and you could go sit out on the lawn and play on the playground. And they had school kids bringing around wagons with water bottles and ice cream sandwiches, as I recall. But it was unearthly, like you say. suddenly you can see the stars because the sun is totally blacked out for, just a few minutes. And the animals apparently believe it's night because the birds suddenly go silent, and the
Yeah.
temperature drops. It's a complete transformation
Yeah.
for a couple minutes.
Did you guys experience any sort of collective or communal like outpouring of a spiritual experience like my wife described where people started singing?
We did not. It was it was lovely. It was socially lovely. I mean, people were very friendly and stuff, it was beautiful and moving. But I am super impressed by the breaking out into singing. That did
Yeah.
not happen where, but I could imagine it. That's really neat. Well, Cameron, thank you for sharing this with us. I really appreciate you taking the time and talking about the art. Is there anything that I should have asked that didn't? Is there anything that you want to make sure you say to people who are watching?
Well, I think you did a great job. I think we covered a lot more than I thought we would. It's a big subject. Um, but but I think one thing we touched on that I think I would probably regret if I didn't bring up a little more is that part of the impetus of this project is that it's an anti-literalist, anti-fundamentalist project. It's a deliberately pluralistic project. When you zoom out at the level of the astronomy behind these stories, it makes it very hard to look at a particular verse of scripture or a particular dogma and put all your chips into that. When you understand that there's a unifying mythology to all of it, it results in a more universalist perspective on religion. And so I would be appalled if after all this work there was a dogma about what I'm doing. It's as you've said, it's an artistic endeavor to celebrate the plurality of the religious experience, not to create a narrow dogma.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm hoping that by people experiencing the scroll, it will expand their religious experience. Right.
Yeah.
So I spent 20 years as a what Carl Sagan calls atheist light, which is a pantheist. I was not a deist for many years, but I was religious, and what I'm doing now is as compatible with what I was doing then. Right now, I'm a church-going person. I love going to church, but the Apotheosis Scroll would have been appreciated by my anti-going to church self as well.
No.
So,
No, I understand. I appreciate that. So, so the URL is apotheosisscroll.com, right?
yeah.
And am I right? I don't think we touched on this. Am I right to remember that there's a second display of at least some of the art going up, or maybe it's already gone up and passed? Wasn't there a somewhere in the Pacific Northwest? There's like I'm getting this totally wrong, I'm sure. Wasn't there a church that was going to put it up on display for a time?
Wait, it was on display at the Sacramento Episcopal Cathedral.
That's what it was.
Yeah, I have a nice relationship with them, and we would like to put it on display in full length. It was a small display, and we hoped and tried to see if we could show the whole thing. I'm looking for ways to put this display up
Yeah.
um, and it's expensive for me. It's a major commitment
Yeah.
to build this display, but I hope it'll be seen more often than not um, in coming days.
Okay.
But right now, there's no plans for another show, but
Okay.
hopefully that'll change.
Okay. But there is the website, and
Yeah,
the video introductions to the are coming up to go with the panel art as well.
yeah. So when you go to the website to apotheosisscroll.com and you click on the thing that says Apotheosis Scroll, it'll show you all of the panels. And you can click on any of those and you can zoom in on them. And to protect my copyright of my art, it's not the full res image. You'll get blurry as you zoom in very far. So you're invited to buy a thumb drive, or I'll give you a Google link, and you can see them in high res. But that's a way that I can hopefully make some money, just like selling a book. So if you want to see them in high res, you can support me by buying a thumb drive, and you can indicate when you're prompted to in an email to me that you don't need a thumb drive. We can just send you a Google link,
Yep.
But that way you can see the images in full res. But any of those images that have the YouTube logo on them have a video commentary. And I think you'll like the video commentaries. Some of them, they're a little heavy. There's a lot going on in them. But I'm trying to, it's just like a mystery initiation, where the more you know, the more you get. And if you just want to breeze through it because you're, on the treadmill and you just want to kill 20 minutes, you can do that. I think you can get something out of that. But if you want to watch it a couple times, you can choose how you deal with those video commentaries. But there's a lot of information in each of those, although they're fairly short. And so anytime you see a YouTube logo on one of those images, I've made a video, but it'll take years for me to catch up to where I've left off.
Yeah, and you got 37 more panels to do too, so.
Right. It'll be, I suspect it's a lifer here. I think this is what I'm going to be doing until I drop.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Kamron, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been DJ Butler, Senior Editor, Art Press with the Gopher Wood Lounge. And remember, the humans win in the end.